The relentless, heavy downpour of a Tuesday afternoon rainstorm lashed against the massive glass windows of the corner coffee shop. Inside, the air was thick with the comforting scent of roasted espresso beans and warm vanilla. It was supposed to be a quiet haven from the miserable weather outside. Sitting alone at a small wooden table near the back was Latoya. She was a 36-year-old black woman, dressed in a nondescript dark gray hoodie and a slightly oversized waterproof jacket. Her posture was incredibly relaxed, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee as she quietly reviewed a thick file of paperwork. She was entirely minding her own business. But the peaceful atmosphere was violently shattered when the heavy glass door of the shop swung open. The little brass bell above the door chimed cheerfully, a sound that completely betrayed the absolute menace walking into the room. It was Officer Brody. Brody was a 28-year-old white patrol cop wearing a dark, rain-slicked uniform that clung tightly to his aggressive, puffed-out chest. He stomped his heavy tactical boots onto the hardwood floor, his eyes immediately scanning the quiet room like a predator looking for an easy meal. He walked right past the older white patrons and the college students, his eyes locked directly onto Latoya. A sickening, deeply arrogant sneer crept across his pale face as his hand instinctively dropped to rest on the heavy metal cuffs hanging from his duty belt. He was staring at a woman who was simply drinking coffee, completely convinced she was a criminal who did not belong in this upscale neighborhood. But Brody was about to learn a lesson that would permanently destroy his entire life. He had absolutely no idea that the quiet black woman sitting in the corner was an elite, highly decorated special agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Have you ever been completely targeted and humiliated by a corrupt authority figure who fabricated a reason to ruin your day just to stroke their own ego? Drop your story in the comments below because I read every single one of them. And exposing these horrifying abuses of power is the only way we stop them from hiding behind their badges. To truly understand the intense psychological warfare that is about to erupt in this coffee shop, we have to dive deeply into the complete backgrounds of these two individuals. Let us start with Latoya. At 36 years old, Latoya is a brilliant, highly lethal apex predator in the world of federal law enforcement. She graduated at the absolute top of her class at Quantico. She currently leads a highly classified, organized crime task force that tracks down dangerous fugitives and dismantles multi-million-dollar syndicates. Her mind is a constantly churning supercomputer of legal statutes, combat tactics, and psychological profiling. But carrying the gold federal shield does not magically erase the reality of being a black woman in America. Latoya is deeply, intimately familiar with the exhausting weight of the black tax. She knows that when she takes off her tactical vest and puts on a civilian hoodie, the world immediately stops seeing her as an elite agent and starts seeing her as a suspect. She has spent her entire life learning how to swallow her completely justified pride to de-escalate situations with fragile, aggressive men. Today, she had been working for 14 straight hours, setting up a massive federal raid. All she wanted was 20 minutes of absolute silence and a hot cup of coffee before the chaos began. Standing across the room, radiating a deeply toxic aura of insecurity, is Officer Brody. Brody is 28 years old, a man who barely scraped his way through the local police academy. A deep dive into his psychological profile reveals a deeply pathetic, profoundly insecure young man who was bullied his entire life. He did not put on a badge to protect his community. He put on a badge because he was utterly desperate to finally be the one holding the stick, to finally have the power to legally bully the people he felt superior to. Brody relies entirely on intimidation, using his uniform as an artificial shield for his complete lack of emotional intelligence. When implicit bias mixes with a fragile ego and state-sanctioned authority, it creates a ticking time bomb of a human being. Brody actively seeks out people he perceives as vulnerable, entirely for the sick thrill of watching them cower. Watching this nightmare slowly unfold from behind the espresso machine is Moshe. Moshe is the 45-year-old Middle Eastern owner of the coffee shop. He is nervously wiping down the counter, his heart racing as he watches the aggressive cop hone in on Latoya. Moshe knows Latoya is a paying customer, but as an immigrant, he is absolutely terrified of confronting a local police officer. Sitting just 2 tables away from Latoya is Uma. Uma is a 20-year-old college student with a heavy backpack and a sharp sense of social justice. She instantly senses the racist tension filling the room. Without making a sound, Uma quietly slides her smartphone out of her pocket and hits record, resting it against her coffee cup to capture the entire interaction. Brody marched across the coffee shop floor, his wet boots squeaking loudly against the wood. He completely bypassed the empty tables and stood directly over Latoya, invading her personal space. He cast a dark, threatening shadow over her paperwork. "You need to pack your things and leave this establishment right now." Latoya did not flinch. She did not gasp. She simply looked up from her paperwork, her dark eyes incredibly calm, but holding the terrifying weight of a woman who interrogates cartel bosses for a living. "Excuse me, I'm drinking the coffee I just purchased." Brody leaned in closer, his hand gripping his heavy metal flashlight in a blatant attempt to intimidate her. "I said pack it up. We've had reports of transients loitering and running scams in this area, and you match the description. I strongly suggest you leave before I arrest you for criminal trespassing." "Officer, I am a paying customer. You have absolutely no reasonable articulable suspicion to detain me or ask me to leave." Brody's face flushed a deep, furious shade of crimson. His fragile ego absolutely shattered the moment a black woman used legal terminology to challenge his completely fabricated authority. "Are you playing lawyer with me? Get on your feet right now. You are going out in handcuffs." Before we watch the absolute, spectacular destruction of Officer Brody, we must pause the narrative. We must dive deeply into 3 terrifying alternative realities that expose the deeply rigged nature of our society. First, we absolutely must ask what would have happened if the person sitting at that table had been a wealthy, 36-year-old white woman. If Brody had walked in and seen a blonde white woman in a cashmere sweater reading a book, this terrifying interaction would have never occurred. There would have been no aggressive posturing. There would have been no fabricated claims of matching a suspect's description. Brody's implicit bias would have instantly categorized the white woman as an innocent citizen deserving of utmost respect and protection. He probably would have smiled at her, offered a polite greeting, and bought his own coffee before leaving. The absolute privilege of being presumed innocent, of being treated with basic human dignity rather than immediate violent suspicion, is a luxury completely denied to Latoya. Brody's willingness to casually threaten her with arrest proves he viewed her entirely through the lens of vicious racial prejudice. Second, we have to confront the horrifying reality of what would have happened if Latoya had reacted with entirely justified human anger. Imagine if Latoya had completely lost her temper when a racist cop ordered her out into the freezing rain for absolutely no reason. What if she had slammed her coffee mug onto the table, yelled at him, or aggressively demanded his badge number? In any normal human interaction, becoming furious when someone falsely accuses you of a crime is a completely natural response. But for a black woman facing down an armed police officer, anger is a deadly luxury. If Latoya had shown even a fraction of the aggression that Brody was projecting, he would have immediately weaponized her reaction. Brody would have used her raised voice as instant justification to draw his taser or his service weapon. He would have violently slammed her face into the wooden table, slapped her in heavy steel handcuffs, and dragged her out into the rain. And the ensuing media smear campaign would have been a masterpiece of character assassination. The police union would have released a statement claiming the officer felt threatened by a highly erratic and combative suspect. Latoya's entire life would have been violently erased and replaced with a racist caricature of an angry black woman. She knew this terrifying reality intimately, which is exactly why her composure remained completely flawless and unbreakable. Third, and perhaps most chilling of all, we have to look at the legal nightmare that would have unfolded if Uma was not secretly recording this on her phone. What if the coffee shop had no cameras, and just the barista was there to witness it? This is the darkest, most terrifying reality of the American justice system. Without video evidence, this encounter becomes a simple game of he said, she said. And in a local courtroom, the man wearing the blue uniform almost always wins. Brody could have written a completely fabricated incident report, claiming Latoya was screaming obscenities and trying to assault customers. Latoya would have been arrested, her federal clearance immediately suspended pending an investigation. The burden of proof in the court of public opinion always falls on the victim to prove they were abused. It never falls on the corrupt authority figure to prove they acted lawfully. It is a terrifying realization that millions of minority citizens face every single day. They live knowing that an insecure bully can completely ruin their life with a single lie. But today, the universe had aligned to deliver a massive, devastating dose of karma to Officer Brody, sitting in the tense silence of the coffee shop. Latoya did not argue with the angry patrolman. She did not beg him to understand. She simply stared at him with an expression of absolute, unadulterated pity. Brody, completely high on his own perceived dominance, unclipped his heavy handcuffs from his belt. He reached out and violently grabbed Latoya by the shoulder of her jacket, fully intending to physically drag her out of her chair. "I said get up!" Brody screamed, spit flying from his lips. Latoya slowly stood up. She did not raise her hands in surrender. She did not reach for her waist. With deliberate, highly telegraphed movements, she reached into the inside breast pocket of her waterproof jacket. Brody's eyes widened in sudden panic as his hand instinctively dropped to his firearm, but Latoya's hand emerged holding a thick, heavy, black leather wallet. With a swift, decisive flick of her wrist, she flipped the leather open right in front of Brody's face. Nestled perfectly inside the leather was a massive, gleaming gold shield. Directly beneath the shield was a pristine federal identification card, bearing her photograph and the bold seal of the Department of Justice. Latoya, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The silence that fell over the coffee shop was completely deafening. The heavy metal handcuffs in Brody's hands suddenly felt like they were made of lead. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified, pale ghost standing in the middle of the room. The arrogant, racist smirk that had defined his entire existence vanished in an absolute instant. His mind rapidly cascaded through the horrifying realization of exactly what he had just done. He had not just profiled and assaulted a random civilian, he had just aggressively detained and put his hands on an active-duty federal agent. Latoya looked directly into his terrified, trembling eyes. Her voice cut through the silence like a razor-sharp scalpel. "Take your hand off my jacket right now, before I arrest you for assaulting a federal officer." Brody snatched his hand back as if he had just touched a burning stove. He began to hyperventilate, his chest heaving as absolute panic flooded his entire nervous system. "You are currently in violation of Title 18 U.S.C. Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under color of law. I want you to pick up your radio right now and call your chief of police to this exact location. If you do not do exactly as I say, I will have a federal SWAT team rip the doors off your precinct within the hour." Brody could not speak. His throat felt completely swollen shut. His hands shook so violently that he dropped his handcuffs onto the hardwood floor with a loud, metallic clatter. He fumbled for the radio mic attached to his shoulder, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. He frantically called his supervisor, begging for Chief Trent to report to the coffee shop immediately. Sitting in the corner, Uma smiled widely as her smartphone recorded the absolute destruction of a bully. Moshe let out a massive sigh of relief from behind the espresso machine. 10 agonizingly long minutes later, the flashing lights of a police cruiser illuminated the rain-soaked windows of the shop. Chief Trent, a hardened 55-year-old veteran of the force, burst through the front door. He took one look at his pale, trembling patrol officer, and then looked at the black woman holding a gold FBI shield. Chief Trent's stomach completely dropped into his boots. He cautiously approached Latoya, his posture rigid with profound professional deference. "Agent, I am Chief Trent. What exactly has happened here?" Latoya calmly explained the completely unprovoked harassment, the fabricated claims of trespassing, and the physical assault when Brody grabbed her jacket. She pointed to the security camera mounted above Moshe's register, and then pointed to Uma sitting in the corner with her phone. "You have a rogue, racist officer operating under your command, Chief. He is a massive liability to this city, and he just assaulted a federal agent." Chief Trent turned to look at Brody, his eyes burning with an intense, utterly terrifying rage. Brody tried to stammer out an apology, trying to claim he made an honest mistake, but his words were completely hollow. Before Trent could even speak, the heavy roar of a massive engine echoed outside. A sleek black tactical SUV pulled up directly onto the curb outside the coffee shop. The doors flew open, and Vera stepped out into the pouring rain. Vera was a 40-year-old white woman, the assistant director of Latoya's federal field office. She was wearing a tactical vest and was flanked by 2 heavily armed federal agents. Vera marched into the coffee shop, her presence completely sucking the remaining oxygen out of the room. She looked at Latoya, verified she was unharmed, and then turned her terrifying gaze onto Brody. "Chief Trent, you are going to strip this man of his badge right now, or we are taking him into federal custody." Chief Trent did not hesitate for a single second. He walked directly up to the trembling, crying Brody. "Turn around and give me your duty belt," Trent ordered coldly. Brody sobbed openly, tears of absolute panic mixing with the rain dripping from his hair. He was forced to unbuckle his heavy duty belt and hand it over to his chief. Trent reached out and brutally ripped the silver badge right off Brody's chest. The humiliation was absolute and entirely public. Brody was marched out the front door of the coffee shop in front of the entire crowd of customers. He was shoved out into the freezing rain, completely stripped of his power, his authority, and his entirely unearned dignity. The professional and legal fallout for Brody was nothing short of apocalyptic. Because he assaulted an FBI agent, the Department of Justice took complete control of the investigation. Brody was instantly fired, completely stripped of his pension, and permanently banned from ever working in law enforcement again. He was federally indicted on multiple felony civil rights charges. He was bankrupted by staggering legal fees, and ultimately sentenced to 18 months in a federal penitentiary. The young racist who thought he was completely invincible found himself locked in a steel cage. His entire life was entirely destroyed by a single, arrogant assumption. Latoya, however, simply finished her coffee. She thanked Moshe for his hospitality, gave Uma a respectful nod, and walked out to the black SUV with Vera. She did not gloat or scream or celebrate. She simply used the immense power of her intellect and her federal authority to surgically remove a dangerous predator from the streets. This story is a profoundly powerful reminder of the absolute terrifying reality of unchecked authority. A shiny badge does not make a person honorable, and a uniform does not grant anyone the right to strip a citizen of their humanity. Power without absolute accountability always breeds complete corruption. It forces us to confront the deeply uncomfortable truth that for every corrupt cop caught trying to bully an undercover agent, there are thousands more operating in the dark. But this story also shows us that true power does not roar. True power does not need to scream or threaten or put its hands on people. True power is cold, calculated, perfectly disciplined, and always waiting for the exact right moment to strike. See you in the next one.